This video will cover most of the material that we've learned in Chapter 4. First, let me point out that we're going to be using Chapter 4's design template, and we're going to be using this template throughout the rest of the class, including our projects. So I have my name on it. I'm going to go ahead and just hide that information and so I can fit more on the screen. What we're doing for this program design is we're going to update the one that we did in Chapter 1, which was going through and calculating the tip. In this case, what we want to do, there was no discrimination between the tip amount. So if your service was really good, you left 15%. If your service was really bad, you left 15%. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the program a little bit more dynamic. We're going to ask the user to enter in the quality of service, and then based on the table, we're going to go through and we're going to give 10% tip if they had fair service, 15% tip if they had good service, and 20% tip if they had excellent service. So again, we've just updated the scenario, adding some new functionality to this. So let's come down to our algorithm. In our algorithm, we're no longer going to get the tip from the user, we're going to get the quality of service. So we're going to get the meal price and the quality of service from our user. From this, we're going to go through and we're going to determine the tip percentage based on the table above. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to just put all of that into my algorithm, determine the tip percentage based on the following table. This table I just copied from above. And then we're going to calculate the tip by multiplying the price of the meal by the tip. And then we're going to display the total tip. Our variables, we have meal price. We're going to need to add a variable for quality of service, and this one will be a string data type. So this will hold the quality of service that they receive from the user. We'll have our tip and our float. Our formulas are the same, meal price and tip. Our hierarchy is not going to change either. We're going to go through and we're going to leave that as the same, but our top-down design will change because we've added additional processes. Our additional processes include going through and determining what the tip percentage is. So to do that, we're going to say if the service equals fair, then 10%. If it's good, then 15. If it's excellent, then 20. So I'm just going to go through and add those into my process calculation column. And then the output variables are total tip. We haven't changed that at all. Coming down to our test data, I'm going to go through, once again, I'm going to change this into orientation by doing a section break. So I'm in page layout, breaks, next page, and I'm going to do the same thing for my pseudocode. So now my test data is all on a page by itself, and I'm going to change this to landscape. From here, I'm no longer inputting the tip. What I'm going to be inputting is quality of service. And then my formula, I'm going to go through and add a new column. This column will be the process. And the process for this is going to be the same that I had up here in my process chart. So let me go through and make this a little bit neater. So I have exactly the same thing that I put up in my top-down design. And I have that now as an additional column in my test data. I'm going to get rid of these values because I'm not going to use these exactly anymore, and it'll make it a little bit easier to go through and explain. So the input of quality of service, if it is fair service, I'm going to ask my user to enter an F. If it's good service, I'm going to ask them to enter a G. I'm going to do one without any quality of service, and then we'll just do a G at the end. So this process would then equate to, if it's fair, they get 10%. If it's good, it's 15%. If it's excellent, it's 20%, no value there. And then if it's good, they get 15%. So here, I'm just going to copy these numbers over, and then we'll go through and do our calculations. I don't have a process or formula here. In this case, it's going to terminate program. And this will make a little bit more sense once we come down to the pseudocode. And then I have 0.15 or 15%. So 1 times 0.1 is $1. 20 times 15 is $3. 23.25 times 20% is $4.65, so that worked out nicely. I don't need one there. And then 125.89 times 15% comes up to be $18.88. So now I've updated my test data, I added my process to it, and I added my input quality of service. So coming down to my pseudocode, there's a couple of things that I'm going to go through and change. One is I'm going to change my block comments because I've added some functionality to my program. And I'm going to put in basically if the quality of service is fair, then the tip is 10% and so on. So I have still who created it and the last date modified. Coming down to my main module, I have to go through and I have to declare a variable for my quality of service. And this will be a string. And I'm going to go ahead and initialize it right here as a null value. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'll place a comment. I'm not going to change anything else. So coming down to executing modules, let's go into the welcome module, and we'll notice that this welcome module should match what I have in my block comments, but it doesn't. It doesn't have any of the new information. So I'm going to go through and add that, which will go and describe the fact that my user is going to go and is going to enter in the quality of service. Once they enter in the quality of service, then it's going to determine the tip percentage. So I just added that. So I've got welcome module taken care of. Get price info. We still need to get the price of the meal, but instead of getting the tip, we're going to ask the user to enter in the quality of service. And I'm going to use a menu-driven option. So it says, please enter the quality of service, enter F for fair service, enter G for good service, enter E for excellent service. What this does is this minimizes the number of keystrokes a user has to put in. The least amount of information that you need from the user or that the user can put in is going to make your program run much better. I could have asked them to enter in a 1, 2, or 3. I could ask them to enter in fair, good, or excellent. This way is just a little bit less typing for your user, and it makes your program run a little bit smoother. And you'll find out why here in just a moment. So I'm going to enter in the price, get price information. Now I'm going to come back up, and I want to make sure that the user actually entered in a string character. To do this, I'm going to use my library function isString, and I'm going to combine this with an if statement. So the first thing that it's going to do, and I'm just going to indent these because it's going to be part of my if. Remember, the isString goes through and determines whether the variable, and you put your variable name there, whether the variable is a string. Is will return a true or a false value. If my user accidentally entered in the number 5, then it will not call calc tip amount, and it will not call display tip amount. I don't want them to do that because I don't want them to execute either one of those unless they've entered in the right information. So let me go through and let me just put some comments in here. So once my comments are in here, I'm going to go and I'm going to complete this end if. So I'm going to terminate this statement, end if. And what I like to do, which makes life a little bit easier, especially when you have nested ifs or a lot of ifs, I like to put comments at the end of end if. This will go through and will tell the developer which if condition this matches up with. So in here I'm validating the quality of service, which matches up with this condition. So it's a nice little thing to have happen. So now I'm going to come down to my calculate tip amount. In my calculate tip amount, I'm going to do a whole bunch of things in here. I'm going to go through and I'm going to determine the quality of service, and then I'm going to go through and actually calculate the tip. So I'm going to add some additional comments here. So it's going to determine the quality of service and calculate the tip amount by multiplying the meal price by the tip percent. So here's where I actually use my chart. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit. And I have my chart for fair, good, and excellent. I'm just going to copy that and bring that back down into my module. It'll make life a little bit easier as we're going through. So here I'm going to have a multi-alternative if statement. So if my quality of service is equal, and you'll notice it's a double equal sign because a double equal sign means comparison, and a single equal sign is for an assignment statement. So I'm going to determine if quality of service equals F, then I'm going to assign my tip variable 10%. And then because it's a multi-alternative, I'm going to use an else. And then I'm going to say if quality of service equals G, then I'm going to assign my tip value to 15% because that's what it's telling me to do in my chart. So let's just move these over. And then my last value would be an E. And if it's an E, then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to set the tip amount to 20%. So we see we have my I lined up with my E's for my else if, nice and neat. I have everything else indented. So if it was fair, it's 10%. If it was good, it's 15%. If it's E, then it's 20%, which matches up with my chart. So I'm going to go ahead and delete my chart or my table. And then I'm going to come back, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to have a default statement. So if my user didn't enter in any of those values, what I want to do is I want to tell them that the program can't run anymore, and because they've entered in an invalid value for quality of service, I'm going to tell them the program will terminate, and I'm just going to set tip to 0. So this is kind of my flag. So I have my tip percentage calculated or determined from my multi-alternative if statements. And I'm going to come down and I'm going to do a single alternative if statement because I don't want the following to run if my user entered in the wrong value. So if my tip is 0, so if tip is not equal to 0, then we'll go ahead and we'll run this calculation. So this is a single alternative. And so I'm going to go through, and if my tip amount is not equal to 0, my tip percentage is not equal to 0, then I'll go through and do the calculations. And then I'll end the if. If my tip amount is 0, this won't execute, and it'll come back over into my main, and we'll deal with that in just a moment. So I'm going to enter in some additional comments here. So this is for my quality of service, tip percent, determination. This makes it, again, a lot easier. It's a good habit to get into by going through and just putting these additional comments. We don't want that, so this is if tip is not null, is not 0, excuse me. So we have our calculate tip amount. If I come back up to my main, I've called calculate tip amount. I don't want to display anything unless they entered an E, an F, or a G. So I'm going to go and I'm going to make another if statement. And this if statement is, again, defensive programming. So my comments here are to go through and it's going to execute the calc tip amount only if the tip is not equal to 0. So I'm going to come back up. I'm going to indent my call display, and then I'm going to terminate this if statement. And again, this is only going to execute if I have a valid tip amount. So here I have a nested if. I have my outside if. It will only execute any of the information or the statements in there is if quality of service is a string. It'll call my calc tip amount. It will execute my next module only if my tip is not equal to 0. So I'm going to come down to display tip amount, and we can see the total for this meal is in the total tip. So life is good. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. And now let's go ahead and let's go over to Raptor. So again, this is my old Raptor. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go through and I'm going to start updating. So I'm going to go into my comments, erase everything, and update that. Now this is really kind of messy. So look what you can do with your comments. You can go through and you can move these around. And then this can come back up and I'm just simply clicking on them and dragging them over. So I have my meal price, my quality of service, so my quality of service I'm going to assign to a null value, and that's my new one that I have entered in here. And then I have my tip, my total tip, meal price, I have all of those already set. Then I come down to my welcome and my get price information. I haven't made a significant amount of changes to my welcome module, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to simply come over and copy and paste it into my write statement. So from here, I'm going to go into get price info, and I made one change, which is I'm asking for the quality of service instead of the tip. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to change my prompt. And I'm going to ask them for that information, and I'm going to store it into the quality of service variable. Now I come back to main, and this is where I've made some changes. So I've made some changes on my if statement. In Raptor, you're going to use the selection symbol for your if statement. So I have my selection symbol, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag it down right under price info. And my condition is string. So you'll notice I typed the I, and it comes up with all of the is functions. So is string. And then I'm going to put in my variable name. In this case, it's quality of service. And that's all I have to put in. I don't have to put in my keywords. It's just my condition. So from here, I'm going to go and I'm going to call Calc tip if the value of this is true. This is going to resolve to a condition. And so I'm going to come up and I'm going to move up calculate tip amount over to my yes side. So you'll see the little yes right here. So this will execute if this returns true. I'm going to go ahead and try to move that out of the way. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to call calc tip amount. So again, once this equates to true, or in this case, yes, it's going to come down and it's going to run my calc tip amount submodule. So if I go into my calc tip amount submodule and I come down in my pseudocode, they look a lot different. So what I'm going to do here for this first one is I'm going to go through and I'm going to add a selection statement. And this selection statement, the condition, just the condition, is what goes into the diamond. So I'm just going to copy it and paste it. And I'm going to get rid of the word quotes. And then if my quality of service equals F, I'm going to come down that. I'm going to set tip to 10%. So I'm going to use my assignment symbol. And I have tip at 0.10. So I'm going to assign tip to 10%. Then if else if the quality service is equal to G, so it's going to follow the no path. I have another condition, so I'm going to use my selection symbol. I'm going to come over to my pseudocode, grab my condition, get rid of the quotes. And in this case, if my quality of service equals G, I'm going to assign tip 15% or 0.15. And then if it doesn't equal F, it's going to go down to else if a quality of service equals G. If it doesn't equal that, I'm going to check to see if it equals E. So I'm going to use another selection symbol. So I have a series of alternatives. So this is my multi-alternative. In this case, if quality of service equals E, then I'm going to assign tip amount 20%. So I'm going to follow my yes path. And then I have my else statement. So if it doesn't equal, if my quality of service doesn't equal F, it doesn't equal G, and it doesn't equal E, it's going to follow this no path. And in this case, my no path, I'm going to go through and I'm going to display information to my user. So I'm going to display that they enter it in, the quality of service in incorrectly, and the program will terminate. And I'm going to assign my tip amount to 0, because this is my flag that I'm using for my statements throughout. So let's see, let me make this a little bit bigger. If my quality of service is F, it's going to come down here, and then it will exit my if statement. If it's not, it's going to check to see if it's G. If it is G, then it's going to come down, and it's going to exit. If it's not, it's going to come to check to see if quality of service is E. If yes, it'll come down this path. It'll come over and over again. If it's not, it will output a message to the user. It will assign my tip amount to 0, and then it will exit the if statement. So I've taken care of this information in my pseudocode. I'm going to go ahead and put my comments on here. I'm going to come up to my first condition and add my comment, and then I'm down here. So now what I want to do is I only want this to execute if my tip doesn't equal 0. So I'm going to put in another selection. If my tip doesn't equal 0, so tip not equal to 0 is my condition, so I put that in my diamond. If it's not equal to 0, I'm going to follow the yes path, and I'm going to assign total tip, the meal price, times tip. And then I'm going to end if. I don't need anything on my no path. This is a single alternative structure, and so life is pretty good. I'm going to copy my comments and put those in here as well. So now I finished my Calc tip module. I'm going to go ahead and save Raptor, and let me come back up to main. And in Raptor, let me go back over to main. So I've calculated my tip amount if quality of service, if they entered in a string value, if my user entered a string value. Now I only want to display the tip amount if my tip does not equal to 0. And I only want this to run if my quality of service is a string. So I'm going to put in a nested if into my quality of service if. So I have my outside if and my inside if. So if it is a string, it's going to calculate the tip. And then if my tip doesn't equal 0, then I want it to go through and execute my display tip amount. If it doesn't, if it's not, then I'm not going to worry about it. So this will execute my tip amount. Let me go ahead and put these comments in, and I'll do the same with my first condition. So I have a nested if in here. I have a single alternative and a single alternative. So now I've gone through, I've completed my main. Let's make sure that I don't make any changes in my display tip amount, and my display tip amount is the same. So I'm going to go through and save this, scroll back up till I get to my test data. So now that I have everything in my Raptor flowchart, I want to come down and I'm going to do my test runs. You'll notice that the only difference between my Chapter 3 and my Chapter 4 design template is my test data execution results. So I have to go through and run my results first, or run my test data through, and then we'll talk about adding all of this from Raptor to our design document. So I'm coming up here. Our first piece of test data for this is a meal price of $10 and a quality of F. So let's go through and run that. $10 F comes back and tells me my total tip for this meal is $1. Let me just expand these here. And my tip is 10%, so that matches up. I come over, it's 10 times 10%, so it does leave me with $1. So I'm doing good so far. Let me run it again. Come back. I have $20. My service was good. My good service should yield a tip percentage of 15 and an overall tip amount of $3. So we're looking good so far. The next one is 23.25, excellent service. Excellent service gives me a tip of 20%, so that matches up. And then an actual tip amount of $4.65. Okay, so I'm now down to my invalid data. You want to make sure that you have invalid data in your test data set. This will go through and it will ensure that your defensive programming is working. So now, from now on, you should have invalid and valid data. So let me go through and run this. $5.36. I'm not going to enter in a value here. Click on OK. It should tell me that I didn't enter a valid entry for quality of service, and this program will terminate. I could have put in a lowercase value in here. I could have put in a number. It doesn't matter, just as long as you have some type of invalid data. Now I'm going to go through and run this again at 125.89, and it's good service. So good service is 15%. I should come out with 18.88, and that's what I have. So now I need to go through and I need to take all of my modules and I need to copy and paste them back into my design document. So I have these, I just cleaned this up from the first version. So I'm going to do print to clipboard, and I'm going to continue through this through my welcome all the way down to my display tip amount. So now I have all my modules copied over into my design document. Now this last section is test data execution results. So I'm going to come into my master console. I'm going to highlight everything that I have in here because it's all of my test data runs. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to paste it into my Word document. So I've pasted in all of my execution runs. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to make sure that I have my invalid one. Then I'm going to take both of these. If there were a project, I'm going to zip them together and I would submit those into the associated Dropbox. If you have any questions on the information that we covered in Chapter 4, please go ahead and post that on the discussion board or ask your professor. Thank you.